Hi, this is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy, and I'm here today with Dr. Ferdinand Visco, who's the author of the book Growing Up Italian American. So thanks, Ferdinand. I appreciate you being here.
My pleasure. Thanks, Bob.
So I'd like to start with, I definitely want to get into the book, but I'd like to start with when did you start, really getting into looking for the family in Italy or tracing your roots in America? I know you have a big history in both places.
Well, my mother was like a pack rat, so she collected a lot of pictures, and she was very much into Italian American culture, and she taught me from a very early age to respect it and to love it. And I had all these things. I had stuff from my cousins. I had pictures from my cousins. I had, you know, first cousins once removed, and people were born from 19. My first cousins were born from 1920 to 1954. So you can imagine how many years of information I was able to cull. And they gave me stories. They actually wrote books themselves, and they allowed me to take excerpts from their books. And they sent me pictures, and we compared notes, recipes, proverbs, and I just couldn't let the family history die. And that was basically my incentive to do this.
Yeah, and your family is very similar to mine. I think your family's a little bit older than mine, your grandparents, but I have the same thing. I have first cousins that were only a couple of years younger than my mom. So spanned like 30 years almost or something like that.
What's funny is that we had an uncle. Actually, it was my mother's uncle because my grandfather remarried after his wife died, and he was like 75 years old when he had this child, and therefore this child was my mother's uncle, who was actually younger than she was, and his name was Antonio, and so they called him uh, Zio Antonio Uch, small Uncle Anthony. Now, they said it so fast that when we were kids, we thought his name was Sintony Uch. So you would just, as kids, we didn't understand Italian, so we just, smushed the words together, and we thought that was his first name.
Now that's funny. That's funny because my mother's Uncle Dominic, and the funny thing about Uncle Dominic is there were four Dominics born to his parents before he was born, and they all passed away. And they kept, they stuck with that Dominic, Dominic, Dominic. But he they always called him, and I thought this was his name, Zimanguch. I didn't know any better, but it's almost the same thing. So now I know both your parents are Italian. So when did they come to America, and where did they settle?
Well, my mother came when she was like 3 months old, and she came on a boat with her father and the family, and they first settled in New York City for about 6 months, and then he was a jeweler, so he opened a jewelry store in Williamsburg, and that's where they lived. And like other Italian Americans, he must have had some kind of money, and I don't know how he got the money, but he got enough money to buy a house in Williamsburg. And like other immigrants, what they did, they rented out the rooms. They rented out rooms above. So he had two apartments above. He rented them out, and his family lived in the back of the jewelry store. And they kind of built extensions and bedrooms and stuff like that, and that's how they survived. And he did rather well. I mean, and his idea was education. Education is most important, and he felt that if his children were educated, they would escape from the prejudice, anti-Italian prejudice that was available at the time. And he loved the medical profession for some reason, and so much so he wanted his sons to become doctors. And he said, if you become a doctor, people have to come to you for help, and then you won't have to deal with anti-Italian prejudice. And so what he did was to make his children want to be doctors. He painted a Gray's Anatomy book and a microscope on the ceiling of the boys' study room. So when they would lie down, they'd look at the ceiling, they'd see that. And he used to say, "Vai studi e vai legge," go study and go read. Now that's dialect, and a lot of Italians uh, want me to say "vai studiare e vai leggere," I guess. But that's what he said. He didn't. He cut off the R and "vai studi vai legge," and that was the big deal. And in fact, two of his sons did become doctors, and another son became a pharmacist, and that son had five sons, and they all became doctors. And then, my mother had me, and I became a doctor. So in my family, because of my grandfather, there are like 21 MDs that we can count. You know, so and that was him.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. That's just incredible. I know, and that whole story for people listening, we'll give you details on the book, but that whole story is in the book, and it's fascinating. Yeah, I found out, through my research through the Sorrentino side, which was very difficult for me to find. I couldn't find anything on the Antonati, but my uh, let's see, it would be my second great grandfather, Angelo. He was a pharmacist back in the 1800s, believe it or not. Um, and his son eventually became, I think what happened with his son uh, married my great grandmother, whose family was into law. So Achilles Sorrentino eventually became a lawyer. And then, although I haven't been able to independently verify this, it was in a newspaper in America when he passed away, or when she passed away, that he eventually became a Supreme Court justice in Naples. Um, so that was your mom's family or your dad's family that had.
That was my mom's family, and she became a pharmacist. I mean, as you know, and my father's family. My grandfather was well educated. He was also a musician, and he then became a sailor, and he joined the Italian Navy, uh, the Royal Navy at the time, because they had the
Mm.
king, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And then he left the Navy, joined the Merchant Marines, and then when his ship docked in Boston, he jumped ship and he came to America, and
Wow.
yeah, and he traveled to San Francisco and he took whatever job he could find, and he played musical instruments. He played the trumpet and all that, and he worked in bands and stuff. And then he wanted more steady work, so his cousin wrote to him and he said, "Listen, why don't you come to Hershey, Pennsylvania? The factory there needs somebody who could speak many languages, and my grandfather could speak like five languages." So he came back east, went to Hershey, and Hershey Corporation hired him, and he was a foreman, I guess, at Hershey, in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And uh, I guess the story is that he was eating so much chocolate on the job that he was worried about his teeth. So he decided, it's crazy, right? So, so he decided to come back to New York, and then he had a push cart, and he sold fruits and vegetables. And then eventually opened a grocery store in Manhattan, in Delhi, and then moved to College Point because one of his daughters married somebody in College Point, the Lucarellis, Aruba Lucarelli. In those days, Lucarelli owned a upholstery store.
Yes, I was on the team.
Really?
That was yeah. Yeah, I was when I played Little League. Lucarelli sponsored my team.
Right. So he liked the College Point. He thought it was great, and then he opened the deli and grocery store in College Point. And two of his sons, one, my father went to pharmacy school, and his other son went to dental school. And my father met my mother. Both of them were pharmacists, and they opened a drugstore in College Point. Visco Pharmacy.
Yeah, yeah. So now, what year did they go to College Point? Because College Point, I mean, I was 3 when we got there, 1954. Uh, and it was just, there was still, a lot of the German stuff left around. There weren't a lot of Italians, but more and more were coming in through the 50s and 60s. So what year did they get there?
Well, I guess my parents married in 1939, so must have been the early 30s, I guess, that they came.
Wow. So they probably were right on the cutting edge of Italians going into College Point.
Well, as you know, I mean, when we were kids, well, when I was a kid, I grew up obviously in College Point, and it was German, Irish, and Italian.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, we all know Flessels and places like that. I still remember where the beer hall was, where Coppola's eventually wound up, on 14th Avenue. I vaguely remember that.
Some kind of what they call it, the village something.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, yeah. Uh, and so yeah, so I still remember that, but that's true. I mean, going to St. Fidelis, that's what it was. Irish, German, and Italian, and you had a couple of others, but not too many. Um, so I know you had told the story in the book. You tell the story about your parents meeting, and there's a little bit of, I'm trying to remember exactly, but there was a little bit of story about your mom becoming a pharmacist, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, she, you know, uh, figured that she's not going to get married. She thought she was going to become a spinster. So she decided, well, I got to take care of myself. What am I going to do? So she went to pharmacy school, and then she met my father through, in those days you met people through people, right? So, and then she met my father, and they really hit it off. I mean, they were a team. It was unbelievable. I mean, that kind of marriage, amazing.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna guess that when she went to pharmacy school, there probably weren't a lot of women going to pharmacy school back then.
Right, right, yeah. And it was like 3 women in her class.
Wow.
So, yeah. And of course, she was older. She was the oldest woman. She was like in her 30s, and the kid that these other people were, you know, teenagers, 18, 19, 20. So, but she did it. She was
Yeah, yeah.
a
No,
brilliant
that
woman.
that that that's fantastic. So now, um, I know you chronicle in the book that you went to medical school in Italy. And I know you have some great stories about that. And I love the one um, about how they give the tests in Italy. And I think they still do that today. At least I know, uh, my cousin Gene, he went to school, he went to medical school in Italy, probably about 15 years after you. But um, I found it fascinating the way you take the tests in Italy.
You sit in front of the 3 professors, and there are 3 students with you. So they're all oral exams. So the professor turns to one student, he asks him a question, and that student will talk, and then he'll say "e poi," and then he turns to the other guy, and then he'll answer the question, the same question usually, and then he says "e poi," and the third person answers the question, and you really need to know something because the last guy on the totem pole there, has got to pull something out because the other people have already said everything they're supposed to say.
Yeah.
And I remember, once I was taking a surgical exam, and I with two Italians, and the first guy he expounded brilliantly, the second guy brilliantly, and I only knew one thing about this disease, and it was that the patient couldn't get an erection, and these guys didn't say anything like that. So I said, "Guy can't get an erection." The professor was so pleased that he gave us all 30 con laude, which means 30 with praise. 30 is like 100, for an exam, right? So, that was one story. And then the great story was that once somebody, I guess he was asking some student a question, some some student was giving an exam, and the guy didn't know the answer. So he said, "Listen, what I want you to do is take a piece of chalk, and I want you to draw a line on the blackboard." So the student got up, he drew a line on the blackboard. When he came to the end of the blackboard, and he said, "Now what do you want me to do, Professor?" He said, "Keep drawing the line, even if it's on the wall." So the student said, "The professor said so, I got to do it." So he draws the line on the blackboard. He reaches the door. When he gets to the door, the professor says, 40, out. That meant he failed, right? So these guys were winning.
Wow. Oh my goodness, that's terrible. That's really, really terrible. So how many years were you in school in Italy?
Well, it's 6 years medical school after high school. So, but I got credit because I was an undergraduate in the States. So I was there like 5 years, and it was great.
Oh, wow.
Just great, just great. It was
I'm sure it
to,
was.
to be in Europe and have a reason to be there. Legitimate reason. Uh, it was great, just great.
Yeah, no, I know because we lived in England for 26 months when I worked for Chase, and yeah, you can't beat those experiences, and I was getting paid, so it was even better. uh, so while you were there, were you able to travel to any of the ancestral towns, or did you do that later? Or
No, no, we did that. I mean, we did travel to Padula, where my grandfather, my mother's father, grew up, and to Vico Equense, which is near Sorrento, and we went there. We tried to find our relatives, and we explored, and we did find people that knew my family, but the big deal was that eventually my parents came to visit Italy. My father was born in the States,
oh, nice.
and so my mother came with my father, I guess, in 1968, I guess. And so they came to Italy, and we took them on a grand tour, to all the major cities and blah, blah, blah. And then we went to Vico Equense and to Padula. And in Vico Equense, there was a prominent Visco family that lived in town, and somebody introduced us to these people. But they didn't seem to really be our family. I mean, the last name was Visco, and they were happy to meet us, and they were very well educated. One was avvocato, he was a lawyer, and the other guy was an engineer, and the other guy was a doctor, and they all lived in this beautiful building in the center of town. They had their offices there. As we were coming out, somebody stopped us and said, "Listen, these people are not your relatives. Your relatives live in the mountains, in a place called Masaguan, in the mountains." So we went to the mountains, and there they were, our real family. These were not affluent people, but they were our real family, and they had, pictures of my grandfather and like that, and they were wonderful people, and we still are in contact with them to this day. So it was really great meeting them, and I mean, lots of stories about them. I wanted to. I had a child at this point. My first child was born in Padua, and that's where I went to medical school. And so when we went on this trip, we didn't take my kid because we were running from town to town, and my daughter was like 2 years old, 2 or 3 years old. So she stayed with her godmother, who was Italian, and our housekeeper in Padua. So we tried to call Padua to find out how she was doing. So we went to the tobacco store, which had the only phone in town, and I tried to call Padua to speak to her, and the operator got it all screwed up. I mean, couldn't find the phone number, and then he gave me a phone number in Bologna, and it was crazy. And my cousin was with me, and he finally got fed up. He grabbed the phone and he said, "Listen, You all screwed up here. You don't know. Do you know who you're talking to? This is my cousin from America. Okay? If you don't give him the right number, I'm going to pull the phone off the wall. Okay? That was his way of getting back at the phone company. I said, "Whoa, Cugino, calma, take it easy, because if you wreck the phone, I won't be able to do anything." So eventually, I did get in contact with my daughter, and what could I do? I just I expressed gratitude to him for helping me, taking care of business here. So they were great people, lovely, lovely people.
Yeah, we made one trip to Italy when we lived in England, and I hadn't started my research, and I really didn't know anything. I mean, I knew my dad's family was from Naples, and we took the train from Rome to Naples just to pick up a car to drive to Sorrento, and I didn't know at the time that my grandmother, uh, her family, actually both families, my grandmother and my grandfather, they lived about a half a mile from the train station, and I had no idea. And when I found that out, recently, I was like, "Oh, I can't believe we were right there." Um, and my dad's family was well off. His father, they were okay. Like I said, they were lawyers and doctors. My dad's mom was from nobility, and they basically like owned the whole street. That I see from the records and everything. But I didn't know that I had anybody there. My grandmother's last name is Piramalo, and there were only two in America, her and her aunt. Nobody else came, and there was probably no reason for them to come. And then, I eventually started finding, some third and fourth cousins, and we were supposed to meet them last April or May. That didn't happen, so we're praying that we get there this year. And we've made a lot of contact through Facebook, but it's certainly that's not the same as meeting them in person. Um, so back to America, I don't recall, although I probably did, the Visco name on the pharmacy. I remember it. I think after your dad sold it, I guess it became, was that the College Point pharmacy?
Yes, right, John.
Yeah, because I definitely remember the front. Um, After it was remodeled, I remember all of that. And yeah, that was the time when you didn't have CVSs and all those things. You had a couple of pharmacies in town, and where you would go get your Coca-Cola syrup when you
Right.
needed it. Kids, anybody under 50 who hears that probably say, "What are they talking about, Coca-Cola syrup?" But uh, that when you had an upset stomach, that was the and the doctor would come to the house. And I'll tell you my funny doctor story. Two funny doctor stories. My doctor was growing up was Dr. Cohen in Whitestone, and he, yeah, God, I think he was practicing into his almost 90, uh, and he would come to the house and everything. But he was my dad's doctor. My dad was in White lived in Whitestone, so that's how long he was practicing. Um, but yeah, I mean, College Point was a great town, and I know in the book there's a little bit of a story about a mafia, and you give me your mafia story, and I'll give you mine.
Okay. Well, the mafia story, there are actually two, but the one story comes from my cousin. It's not from me. They lived in Brooklyn, so and they were you know he went to medical school in Italy, and he played in a local bar there in Italy. Italian bar is not really like a place that you get drunk. It's like more like a pub, like a cafe,
Yeah, right.
And they had table games, and they had the game of calcio, and that was unknown in the United States. What we call foosball, I guess, in America, right? And he saw the thing, and he said, "This is a good game. I think I'm going to bring it to back home and see if my brothers like it." And he shipped it home one summer, and so his brothers liked the game, and then he got the idea. Maybe what I can do is I could sell this game. I could. He had an uncle who had a tool and die works, actually in College Point. His name was Zappa, Joe Zappa, and so he talked to his brother, his uncle, and the uncle decided he could make a table like that. And so they made a number of calcio tables, and he put them in the different bars and in a bowling alley and all that kind of stuff. And people loved the game, and they would play for rounds of booze and whatever. Then he got the idea. Well, actually, a bartender got the idea that, well, why don't you put like some kind of contraption so the patrons have to pay money to play the game. So they fixed something. They put some coins in that released the soccer ball, and then they were, making money with the machines. And half the profit went to the boys, and half went to the owners of the bar and the bowling alley. So one day, the owner of the bowling alley calls my cousin. He says, "Listen, we have a little problem here. Somebody wants to meet you tonight outside the bowling alley." So, so my cousin goes to the bowling alley at night, and a big black Cadillac pulls up, and the big guy gets out, and he says, "You Tony Barata?" He says, "Yeah, my name is Tony Barata." He says, "Listen, I got somebody who wants to meet you. Come in the car." So he gets into the car, and there he is, Joe Profusely. Right? So Joe says to my cousin, "Listen, I know you're putting games in places. When games in places, that's our business." And he keeps jabbing him in the chest. And he says, "Listen, get the games out of the bar and the bowling alley. So I know you're going to medical school, and your uncles are taking care of my family, and they're nice people, and you get a lot of respect as a doctor. Just get the things out." So he leaves, but he decides, I'm going back to medical school in 2 weeks. I'll leave them there for 2 weeks. I'll earn a little money, and then I'll get them out. So meanwhile, Joe Fapacci's henchman called my cousin's father. He was a pharmacist. And he said, "Listen, Mr. Profusely wants to meet you. What time you close this drugstore tonight?" He says, 10 o'clock. He said, "Be there, have nobody else there. We'll knock on the door, and we're going to come in." So my uncle gets all excited, and he keeps saying to himself, perché, I wonder why, what's going on? And he keeps saying, "Povero noi, poor us, oh my God, oh my God. Maybe my son saw a mafia crime. Who knows what's going on?" So Profusely gets into the store, and he says, "Listen, tell your boys to get the games out tonight." Well, so he goes home, he talks to his sons, he says, "Get him out, Stazito, get him out," and then they do that. And then about 2 days later, another goon comes into his store carrying a big box. And my uncle thinks that maybe it's a bomb or something going to blow his store up. And the guy says, "No, no, no." He says, "Listen, this is for you. Mr. Profusely is giving you a gift." And he said, and he opens the box. There's 4 cans of olio di olivo, olive oil. He was the olive oil king. And that's how it was,
yeah.
right? Yeah. So that, was one of the stories. I don't know if you want, I'll tell you another story very briefly. This is now, I'm a chief of cardiology at St. John's. This is later. And St. John's is in Queens, near Howard Beach. Now, Howard Beach is John Gotti territory, right? So I started to take care of a lot of those people from Howard Beach. And one day, this guy, Dr. Baracelli, refers a patient to the heart failure center. And the guy comes to the center with 2 big guys. And I'm thinking, well, these are his sons. I don't know what's going on. So I see this guy, and I examine him, and I say, "Listen, you really shouldn't eat too much salt. Cut down on the salt, and don't eat obviously salty food." And the one son says to me, "Listen, you don't understand. He can't do that. because he eats out all the time. So then finally the guy says to me, "Oh, listen, you don't know who I am, do you?" I said, "No, I don't know who you are." He says, "Go Google my name. You'll find out who I am." Right? So that night I Googled his name, right? And it is John Francese, one of these guys, a made man, actually. So anyway, so the next time he comes back to the center, he says, "So did you Google my name?" I said, "Yeah." Yeah." He says, "So you know who I am now, right?" And after all, these guys that are with me, they're not my sons, right? They're my bodyguards. So we became friends, and he was my patient. Nice guy, and one of his favorite proverbs was, la vecchiaia una carogna, ma che non arriva è vergogna, which means old age sucks, but for those who don't get there, it's even worse, And then he invited me out to dinner once, and I said, "No, no, I'm sorry, John. I was afraid. I mean, these guys were getting shot, and in restaurants and stuff, right?"
Yeah.
So anyway, and then another time, the guy comes running into the center, him and his boys running into the center. I said, "What's up? Why are you running?" He said, "His car just blew up." He says, "Car just blew up." I said, "Yeah, yeah, it happens. Sometimes his car blows up." So anyway, so that was the story, and the guy actually lived. He died only recently. He died late '90s, natural causes.
Wow.
Amazing, amazing.
Wow.
Nice guy, actually.
So I didn't know that your story was a Profaci story because so is mine.
Really? Wow.
I yeah. So I don't know if you know Leonard's Bakery in Corona. If you know Leonard's Bakery in Corona on 108th Street, on no 103rd Street. Anyway, my aunt worked there behind the counter in the 50s and 60s. My uncle was a baker there. And my aunt Mary she was, out of the 9 kids, Aunt Mary was probably the funniest out of everybody. Everybody has the Italian aunt who's the funny Italian aunt, right? And one day, Profaci walks in with his 2 sons, and Profaci's wearing a white fedora. And this particular case, they actually were his sons. And he, which I just found out recently, Profaci was the cousin of the owner of Leonard's. I think he was a cousin. And so he comes walking in, and as he walks past, my aunt says, "Ah, there goes Charlie Chan and his 2 sons." And he walks past, he gives her a look, he walks past, and he's doing his business in the back. And he comes out and he says to her in Sicilian, "You're a real wise one." And the two boys are cracking up, right? And he leaves. Well, her boss, Andy, comes out and he's going crazy. Aunt Mary, what are you doing? Don't you know who that is? Don't you know who that is? She goes, "Yeah, it's Profaci, the olive oil guy." He's not the olive oil. But she was okay. They explained everything about Aunt Mary to Profaci, and everything was fine with all of that. But Howard Beach, we were in a restaurant. I think I had just met my second wife, Marion. And we were in a restaurant. Me and her and my sister and my brother-in-law were in a restaurant in Howard Beach. And the waiter comes over, the owner comes over, and says, "You see those 2 gentlemen over there?" So we said, "Yeah." And they said, "They would like to pay for your dinner if you move to that table over there." They want we were sitting, all the way in the back. They wanted to sit in our table. So we looked and okay. Uh, and then when we were in Sorrento, right in the middle of the square, there's the Circolo Sorrentino. And I guess like the Sorrentino Club or whatever it is, right? And I wanted to take a picture inside. So I went up to the maitre d' who was out there. It was early on a Sunday morning. There's nobody there. And I said, "Could I take a picture? Can I come over here and take a picture?" And he says, "No, no, no, you can, no picture." So I says, well, my name's Sorrentino, I'm from America. I just, the sign. No, you can't take a picture. So I insisted about 3 times, and then finally he gestured over to the corner, and there were the 4 guys with the fedoras and the cigars. And I said, okay, I understand. I understand. But now, so you worked at St. John's Hospital? Did you know Dr. Duca, the orthopedic surgeon, by any chance? He operated on me in 77, I guess it was. But his dad was a pharmacist in Corona. He owned a pharmacy in Corona, and when I had to get my knee surgery, I guess my mother asked somebody in the family, and they said, "Oh, I forget the pharmacist's name in Corona, but his son's an orthopedic surgeon." But he was a funny guy. He was a riot, and I didn't know this at the time, but when he went to operate on my knee, and they said they came to get me for the operation, and they said, "Oh, Dr. Duke is your doctor. He doesn't like us to. We won't put you out till he comes in and sees you in the operating room." And he came in, and I swear this is true. He came in, and he had a scalpel in one hand, and he had a stone in the other, and he's going like this with it, like sharpening it.
It's like a barber, right?
yeah, exactly. So now, they gave you that pre-op stuff, and I'm thinking to myself, I'll never forget this, that, I guess he wants to get a nice clean cut. Then at the time I had a steel wire hanging out above my knee, and I guess that they wrapped the stitches around it, however you guys do that stuff. And when it came time to take that out, I'm in the office, and I look over and I see a screwdriver with paint on it, and I see a pliers, like a regular pliers, like all rusty. And I said to him, I said to him, is that for me, the screwdriver? He goes, no, I used the pliers on you. And he grabs the end of the wire and just takes it out. And I said, all right, I didn't feel anything. And he goes, I'm the painless doctor. And then finally, his office was always packed. His office was in Flushing, always packed. And you're always ready for a 30 or 40-minute wait there. And one day I just get there, I'm sitting there, and the nurse comes over and says, Dr. Duca wants to see you inside. I said, I just got here. She goes, I don't know. He said to come in. He's got a patient there. He wants you to go in. So I go in, and he's there with a woman and a boy, about 16. And he doesn't say anything. I walk in, and he goes, walk across the room. So I walk across. He says, okay, come back. I walk back. He goes, okay, sit down. And he starts talking to the woman in Italian, back and forth in Italian. And then, he says to me, he says, all right, she was done. He said, well, you're here. You might as well just finish with you. So I said, what was that all about? And he goes, I have to do the same operation that I did on you on her son. And she was afraid he was never going to walk again. So I wanted to tell her, yeah, see, he had the surgery. He's fine. He can walk.
You were the model, right?
Well, we could probably talk for hours, especially about College Point. Maybe we'll have to do another one just on College Point.
It's amazing. It's amazing that you are from College Point and you're into this stuff. And it's hard to believe that both of us are into this stuff, and it's wonderful.
I found so many fascinating people. I did 50 of these last year. And I never thought I'd do more than 5. I mean, who knew? But as I find people and people are really great that want to talk about it, whether they're authors or just people. But the one conclusion with all of this is that there seems to be somebody in every family that is just driven to do this kind of thing. And I've had a couple of people tell me, you're there for a reason. They want to be found. And it seems like that's true. And some of the stories that people tell me about how they made a connection or how they found a relative is just really, really incredible. So the book is Growing Up Italian American. It's on Amazon, right? People could find it on Amazon. It's a fascinating book filled with great stories, like we've touched on. It has recipes in there. It has a lot of great photographs, and whether you've been to Italy or not, if you haven't been to Italy, this is going to make you want to go to Italy. Well, thanks again. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Bob.